Italy, the food, the culture, the wine, the mountains, the operas, the Pope, and of course, most significantly for us, the motorcycles. Loud, rude, mechanically visceral, and intolerant of anything other than loving care. And if you mind your budget and you're a patient shopper, not that expensive to buy used. In this episode of El Camino, we buy an old Ducati and try to get it roadworthy in 48 hours. Wish us luck. El Camino is brought to you by Yamaha, revs your heart. Importations TBO, distributor of power sports parts and accessories. And by GP Bikes, Canada's power sports authority. Welcome to El Camino. I was a quirky kid. Once I was old enough to reach the kitchen countertop, I began yanking appliances onto my head by pulling the electrical cords. Coffee makers, toasters, frying pans, that kind of thing. Eventually, I stopped, which meant I had to find a new passion. That passion became lawnmowers and rototillers, snowblowers, anything with a gasoline engine, anything that didn't run that could be made to run. I became a giver of life. Some kids, those without an imagination, look forward to two things every year, Christmas and their birthday. Well, I look forward to two things too. One was in the fall, the other in the spring. They were the municipal large garbage collection days. You'd get the predictable things on the curb, toilets, mattresses. But you'd also get bicycles, washing machine motors, and lawnmowers. Once, I dragged a 3.5 horsepower Briggs & Stratton about 15 blocks. Dragged. It didn't have wheels. The sound, metal on pavement. Coming up the driveway, my mother fled indoors and my father just shook his head. And I'm exactly the same person today. Motorcycles have replaced lawnmowers, but the thrill's the same. There's nothing like dragging a new project back to the garage. This segment is brought to you by Yamaha. Welcome back to El Camino. I have a fondness, well, it's more than a fondness, for Italian motorcycles. It's not that I think they're better than bikes from other countries, far from it. And part of my attraction might be the residual effects of having pulled appliances onto my head. Italian bikes, in fact, the entire Italian motorcycle industry, have characteristics that mirror mine. Historically, Italian industry is teetered on the verge of financial collapse. They make decisions with a complete disregard for what is sound and sensible, and they love complexity for complexity's sake. The Italians also make the quintessential lean sporting motorcycle, and that's what I love. It must also be said that the Italians have also made some truly wretched motorcycles, but the good ones are beautifully designed, if in the past anyway, indifferently assembled, and they embody a certain duality. They're refined, yet unrefined. I love Beethoven, and I love Hank Williams. Italian motorcycles make perfect sense to me, if not to everyone. It's worth noting that new Italian motorcycles have become global products. They're not as quirky as the old ones, like the 30-year-old Ducati in this episode. New Moto Guzzis and Aprilias, Ducatis, MV Agustas are reliable. Maybe not quite Japanese reliable, but then again, what is? Because of El Camino budgetary belt tightening, which is totally my fault, we only have 48 hours to film the resurrection of this 1993 Ducati 900SS. It's a tall order. We'll give it our best shot, but I know it's a lost cause. I can't accomplish anything in 48 hours. I've actually owned this very bike before. I bought it in 2008 for $4,000, rode it once, decided I wanted a different Italian motorcycle, then sold it to my brother a month later for $4,000. He rode it a bit, fell off, spooked himself, and it's been sitting in his garage untouched for a decade. I gave him $4,000 and it was mine. Again. Sitting is as bad for a motorcycle as we learned it is for the human body. Thankfully, my brother drained the fuel tank and the carburetors, so that's a leg up. Now let's take it apart. I'm a list maker, and projects like this, which can make you feel as if you're drowning, it's useful to be able to see that you're making progress. Cue the whiteboard. Long before I started work on the Ducati, I did my research. This version of the 900SS, made from 1991 to 98, has, like every bike, known issues. The most serious of which are cracks that can appear on the frame near the headstock and on the swing arm. I took my time, got a light, checked it out. All good. There are two things that freak people out about Ducatis. Well, three, maybe the cost. The first is a justified fear: desmodromic valves. We'll save that one. The second is that the camshafts are operated by rubber belts, and in this case, the fear is not justified. Cars have used rubber belts to drive camshafts forever. I'm not a mechanic, and I figured it out. However, the ramifications of making a mistake when you change the cam belts is dire. You just need to make sure you pay attention to the timing marks on the pulleys. They let you know everything is in sync. Get it wrong, and the pistons can hit the valves. Very, very bad. Ducati owners, when we bump into each other at coffee shops, talk about valve clearances and timing belt changes. We think they're interesting topics. Making the belt change interval conundrum more complicated is that belts never look worn out. Some people change them every year, some every 5 years. I've never known anyone who had a belt break, but I'm as terrified as the next guy. It's like fearing that a meteorite is going to land on your picnic. You know it's nearly impossible, but once it's in your head, you can't let it go. Changing belts is also a pain in the ass. On this generation of Ducati, the pulleys have little metal lips on the edge that make it difficult to slide the belts off. I managed to get the one off, but the second would not cooperate. I cut it off, which felt like cheating. Wiggling the new belts on was just as time-consuming as taking them off. If you're prone to impatience and you work on your own motorcycle, buy a Yamaha or a Honda. To set the tension on the timing belts, I use a harmonic tester. To make this easier to understand, I'm going to tune my guitar. Now I'm going to tune my timing belts. It's exactly the same principle, and I'm not making this up. This is the part you've been waiting for. I know you have. We're going to talk desmodromic valves. Ducati didn't invent them, but they're the only maker of internal combustion engines in the world that currently uses them. And it's a beautiful system. In every other engine, intake and exhaust valves are opened by mechanical pressure pushing down on the top of the valve, and the valve is closed by a coil spring that pushes it shut. In theory, this presents two problems. The first is that your engine is always pushing against the pressure from a spring, which uses energy. The second is that at high revs, something called valve float can happen, which is when the springs become overwhelmed and can't close the valve fast enough, which kills power. Stay with me. With the desmodromic system, there are no valve springs. The valve is opened in the same way that a valve is opened on a regular engine. The difference is how the valve is closed. There's a little metal finger that positively pushes the valve shut. That's it. Are desmodromic valves necessary? Absolutely not. But that's not the point. The point is that Ducati has turned something as absolutely dull as opening and closing a valve into something romantic. On the flanks of the 900 SS are the words desmodue, which means desmo, and two in Italian. The 900 SS has 2 valves per cylinder. It's the kind of thing that makes Ducati owners feel special. Say it with me. Desmodue. Again, desmodue. See, I feel better already. That's the upside. The downside is that unless you figure out how to set your valves yourself, you're going to have to pay a Ducati technician a lot of money every few years. I've more time than money. I figured it out. Eventually. And it nearly killed me. First, you need a manual. Or 5. Just one of them, this one, has 36 pages dedicated to setting the valves. And you need special tools and a $500 kit of valve shims. The first time I set my own valves, it took me 2 weeks working every evening. And though it's not mentioned in any of the 5 manuals, it helps if you're a Buddhist and can accept that we are all travelers moving through life and that our sorrow comes from our inability to accept what we can't change. And what we can't change is this. Setting desmodromic valves is a colossal pain in the ass. That's enough for day 1. This segment is brought to you by Best Western Hotels and Resorts. Welcome back to El Camino. After timing belts and checking valves, it's a relief to do mundane tasks like oil changes. But don't overlook checking the oil screen to make sure there's no metal shavings, which could mean your rockers are flaking. I'll save that story for another time. After oiling the air filter, it's time to lube the chain, fit new spark plugs, and put a fresh BS battery in. Next up are battery cables. I know that in most cases it's unhelpful to generalize about a society, a culture, or a country. But in this case, I know what I'm talking about. Italian car and motorcycle manufacturers have a fraught relationship with electricity, and I understand it. I have no idea what electricity is. It's invisible, and it can kill you. It's worthy of a horror film. I've owned Italian motorcycles that wouldn't start after a light fog. If you're on a road trip and it rains overnight, forget it. Book another night at the motel and explore the town. Like I did once in Akron, Ohio. On all the Italian bikes I've owned, I've upgraded battery cables. Look at the difference between old and new. Fitting them seemed a simple task, but you have to figure out where to run the cables. The hours pass. The deadline approaches. Oh, I can't remember if I checked the horn. Now this is the exciting part. It's tempting to rush. I try not to. I rush anyway. We're getting close to the test fire. In my lawnmower days, this is the point at which I'd stop eating, bathing, and brushing my teeth. My mother would send my father into the garage, and he'd politely threaten me to get into the house. Down from the lift, air filter back in, tank back on, fuel spilled everywhere. It's a tradition of mine. Ignition on, crank the engine, and eventually it starts. But something's off. Something doesn't sound right. I know my Ducati engines. Mechanically, they're quiet. The racket comes from the clutch and the exhaust. But this engine is making noises, a dry puffing sound, like after you climb 5 flights of stairs with groceries in your arms. I trace it to a leaky exhaust gasket. Then I see fuel leaking onto the hot exhaust pipe. Internal combustion is good. External combustion is a fire in a garage attached to a house. And with that, the deadline is officially blown. This segment is brought to you by GP Bikes. Welcome back to El Camino. Some people think that self-defrosting freezers are a miracle. No. Fuel injection, that's a miracle. The Ducati has carburetors, and they're susceptible to all sorts of issues. Chief among them, dirt. Tiny bits of microscopic dust clog passages and wreak havoc. You hardly know where to look. All you can do is take them apart and start messing around. Turns out my issue was a speck of grit in the needle valve where fuel flows into the float bowl. Fuel wouldn't stop flowing. At least I think that's the problem. At least I hope that's the problem. This is the point at which I wonder what it's like to own a Honda or a Yamaha. It's a beautiful day for a ride, and here I am, lightheaded from gas fumes with hours of work still to go. And until you put everything back together and try it, you just don't know if you've succeeded. Hope in these moments can be hard to find. But with everything bolted back together, I turned the key on, the fuel pump pumped, and no gas came out of the cantankerous carburetors. With my faith in all things Italian renewed, I ordered exhaust gaskets from my Ducati dealer GP Bikes and pondered the Ducati 900 SS. Why did I buy this bike back from my brother anyway? A bike I'd ridden once. Blame Peter Egan. One of the few motorcycle riders who doesn't breathe through his mouth, Egan waxed on about the 900 SS. Owned a few of them himself. He claimed it was an anomaly. Wasn't a hardcore sport bike, wasn't a standard, not a sport tourer. By the standards of the day, it was no more than a so-so performer. It topped out at 130 miles an hour when Japanese 750s and 1000s would go way faster. Yet Egan called the 900 SS his favorite motorcycle. I thought back to my one-day ride in the bike, but the specifics were foggy. In my defense, it was a busy time 15 years ago. I had a 3-year-old, my father had just died, and I'd received a promotion at work that gave me way more work and not more money. I wanted to see what this bike was all about. A week later, the exhaust gasket arrived on my doorstep, and in an hour or so, the bike was ready to go. Such a sense of anticipation as I put my earplugs in and did the chin strap up for my helmet. The bike started right off and sounded good. Better than good. Great, a mellow burble, not too loud, but loud enough. And I made it all the way to the end of the driveway and knew exactly what the problem was. Steering head bearings. Look at them. If you've never ridden a bike with crusty bearings like these, it's like driving a car with a murderous hitchhiker attempting to wrestle the steering wheel out of your hands. Back to the garage, helmet off, earplugs out, bike back in the stand, bodywork off, front wheel off, forks off, triple clamps off, and another round of parts to be ordered. Take 2. With the bearings replaced, I eased out onto the road and gingerly shifted through the gearbox. Ducati transmissions shift one of 2 ways, beautifully or miserably. Neutral on the 900 SS can be tricky to find, but the shifting is light, positive, and above all, mechanical. To step off, say, a modern Honda and onto the 900 SS would be to shock your system. Whereas the Japanese make supremely refined machines, the 900 SS has a raw edge that you either respond to or you don't. If a Honda is a Frappuccino, an old Ducati is a Doppio Espresso. And don't dare come near me with that cinnamon shaker. On a clear stretch of road with the engine humming along and happily up to temperature, I downshifted to 3rd gear and rolled the throttle to the stop. Intake noise drowned out exhaust noise, and in fury the 900 lunged ahead with surprising vigor for a machine with horsepower on the light side of 80. Everything Peter Egan had written about the bike is true. The riding position, for me at least, is all-day ideal. A slight forward lean to raise clip-ons and with moderately rear-set foot pegs. The 900 is thin, unhappy under 3,000 RPM, wonderfully direct in its feedback, surprisingly susceptible to being moved around by crosswinds, and the rear suspension has the sophistication of a Mennonite buggy. It's far from a perfect machine. And yet, I'm in agreement with Egan. It's my favorite motorcycle. But don't run out and buy one. I doubt it's ideal for you. It took me well into middle age to determine that my preference in motorcycles dovetails with the Italian ideal. The Italian motorcycle doesn't profess to do everything well, and that's its strength. An Italian motorcycle never disappears beneath you. It's as insistent a companion as an 8-year-old who won't stop talking. It howls, growls, bucks, and shudders. But get it on a road with sweeping corners and warm, dry pavement, and it becomes an extension of your body. In warm October weather, I took a weekend for myself and did an 800-kilometer loop on brand new, sticky Bridgestone tires. With the needle hovering between 5,000 and 7,000 RPM on that beautifully austere, white-faced Bailey attack, my favorite roads became an Olympic luge run. Huge noise in the run into the corner turned to raucous overrun during braking. And the corner stability is such that the 900 SS sits at whatever lean angle you ask of it without a hint of complaint. My kind of riding is hard solo travel punctuated with strong coffee and quiet moments staring into dark lakes and serene forests. The 30-year-old Ducati 900 SS excels at the narrow wedge of motorcycling that most interests me. I'm thankful we found each other. Thank you for watching El Camino. Clothing was provided by Importations TBO. El Camino has been brought to you by Best Western Hotels and Resorts. Wherever life takes you, Best Western is there. BS Battery, the power you need. And by Spring Toronto Motorcycle Super Show.